they're sort of getting pulled out of these new accountability rules. I don't know. My initial reaction was just, this is nuts. Like, we just need to see why are we exempting parts? We finally have a rule that can apply to all. Let's just go forward with this. It seemed nuts to me. That was my big reaction.
And I think, as always, right, there's always going to be carve-outs in Congress. And I just kind of found it fascinating that this came out after the fact a little bit, because that bill was so big. Probably nobody read it until the last month. So I just want to finish off, Michael. We've been talking a lot about culture in higher ed. You know, you and I wrote the first part of this series, which is now ending, that I worked on all this year with a number of different people. It was great to have you as a co-author. I also just co-authored another piece of that with Sean Hobson, who's the chief design officer at Arizona State EdPlus. We talked a lot about making change stick, and this was part of his doctoral thesis as well, as really giving innovation a home. His big thinking on this was that you really do need these cross-functional units. I just mentioned James Devaney earlier, right? The Center for Academic Innovation at Michigan, Georgetown's Red House, EdPlus at ASU, of course. And, you know, this is something that I know comes up in our discussion at Butler University in Indianapolis that we just had. Much smaller place than a Michigan or an ASU or Georgetown. You know, does innovation need to happen within the university, or do you always need an external unit? And so we really look at that and how culture is in place or not in place if you have it within the university or just sitting outside the university. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, and then we'll kind of wrap up this episode for this week.
Well, quick thought, because I want to counteract my market entrant push here through this through this topic, right? So here's the thing, is that if culture is understood as the processes and priorities, right, that become ingrained in an organization, if you can build structures that intentionally prioritize the type of innovations you want, right, embedded in the structure, and yes, it sits outside the traditional governance when you're trying to do something totally different, and it can sit within when you're trying to do continuous improvement or make big structural changes to the existing. So depending on the type of innovation you want helps you understand the type of structure you need. But I actually think building these structures so that innovation becomes more transparent, becomes more repeatable, becomes part of the culture is the key to institutions doing these sorts of innovations themselves, both within the core, but also externally when they develop new offerings. And sometimes this gets semantics. I always say, well, what's the purpose of the innovation? Are you trying to do Southern New Hampshire and launch a major disruption? Then do what you're doing, right? Are you trying to actually improve the core, make it more relevant, maybe not reset the business model itself? That calls for something different. I think structurally embedding it with real process and real repeatable formulations is critical.
Yeah, and I'm going to take us out here by saying you're absolutely right, because part of the other piece of that paper is building dashboards, incentives, even sunset policies, so you could lock in those new habits and prevent backsliding. So it's not just about sometimes creating these external units, but really building that infrastructure needed to make sure you're tracking what you're doing. Absolutely critical. Well, Michael, it was great to see you again, both in our respective homes, for this episode. And thank you all out there for listening. Please give us some feedback, especially on that first segment. We'd love to know how you're thinking about the future of the university in an age of AI. You know, what is the purpose of college? If you have any feedback on that New Yorker piece that we'll link to in the show notes as well, please send it our way. We'd love to hear from listeners. And thank you again for joining us on this episode of Future You. We'll see you next time.